Hello everyone, thank you glazing friends for taking the time to attend today's webinar. Good to see you all here. The Navigating Products, Product Regulation and Impact on Installers webinar is about to begin. What I'd like to say is, as our industry continues to undergo several shifts in regulation, staying ahead is more crucial than ever. Today, my presenter, John Vanstone, Chair of the ICC for the Building Safety Regulator, will take us into the critical realm of product regulation and the impact it will have on installers and glazing. We'll put a special focus on the compliance issues surrounding products and the compliance. John, in his many roles, has unique and unparalleled insights. I'm very grateful to have him here today to share and impart a little knowledge to us all. Thank you, John, for being here, and over to you.
It's a pleasure. Obviously, I'll always do what you tell me to do, so I'm here. Yes, what I think I'll do is, if it's okay, I'll show my PowerPoint presentation, and if we take our cameras off, it will be big on the screen for everyone, if that's okay.
Of course.
Right. Let me see. Right. You still need. Right. Excellent. Yes. Welcome everyone. Well, good to know you're there. What we're trying to do with all these seminars is actually make sure that information gets out there on what is really happening. I think too often our industry's been behind the eight ball as regards knowing when things are coming, what we need to care about, and products is a subject that's becoming more and more relevant, and particularly with regulatory changes, particularly with issues that are being registered with MPs and are then coming back around the houses. So next week I'll be in an all parliamentary group talking about healthy homes, where products will be a big factor. Sorry, just trying to control my screen. There you go. So for our focus today, the origins of this actually came from the fact that the CERTAS Members Forum, there was some information requested and some complaints about product standards. This then went into the wider construction piece, but what we do here is for industry. It's not just for CERTAS members, it's for anyone that has an interest. We're going to look at what changes have already happened, what is coming down the road in the next 12 months. We'll not be focusing so much on CE marking. This simply is because we're still waiting information from government concerning the 30th of June 2025. The changes are still, as we know, that CE marking will stop and UKCA will come in. However, it is being looked at. As you can imagine, there's been a lot of lobbying on this point. We will cover the key players, so who actually holds power, and to affect change, we'll consider our industry today and the problems we're seeing, a quick look at Regulation 7 and what is going on in that moving forward, and what else is impacting the industry, such as CCPI, which is the Code of Construction Product Information, and the product competence requirements under the Industry Competence Steering Group. Don't worry, all this will be explained. We'll then look at the activity for manufacturers to be aware of, and the final bit of installers. So I'm really aiming to talk only for 30 minutes, leaving time for any questions. I will probably be staying away from the Future Home Standard, simply due to the fact that the Green Book and the expected home energy calculations meant there was little change for our industry, although I am happy to answer any questions at the end on that. The consultation is obviously ongoing, and from a CERTAS perspective, we will be responding, but we've also had a chat with our friends at GGF, so hopefully we'll be putting in some collective information for the industry. Right, as I said, these slides are wordy, but that's simply because we'll be sending them around later, so you can keep them for information. So we've left out, sexy diagrams in place of words. Now, these are the main groups that are involved in actually affecting change. Department for Levelling Up Housing Communities, which is Michael Gove's department, one of 24 ministerial departments. They own the building regulations. They undertake changes to regulations. It is also responsible for the delivery of the Building Safety Act. Building Safety Act created the Building Safety Regulator. It's an organisation designed or established to oversee safety of buildings, particularly in context of construction and design. Its primary responsibility is to ensure that buildings are designed, constructed and maintained in a way that guarantees the safety and health of people who use them. This does include enforcing safety standards, inspecting buildings and ensuring compliance with the building codes and regulations. BSR also works with other regulators, most notably the National Regulator for Construction Products, and BSR itself is part of the HSE. If you want to go back to the Ministerial Department, HSE goes into the Department of Work and Pensions. The National Regulator for Construction Products is a body tasked with overseeing standards and compliance of construction products. This does involve ensuring that products meet specific safety, performance, and quality standards. The regulator's role may include testing and certifying products, monitoring the market, and enforcing regulations to ensure that all construction products used in building projects are fit for purpose and meet the required standards for safety and performance. They have an impact on all products, so we need to keep aware of them. The National Regulator for Construction Products sits within the OPSS. The OPSS, or Office for Product Safety and Standards, operates within the Department of Business and Trade. So a nice web forming there on the government side. It's responsible for regulating the safety of consumer products, including construction products in the UK. Following the Grenfell Tower and recommendations from the Independent Review of Building Regulations and Fire Safety, which was the Dame Judy Hackett review, the OPSS was tasked with establishing this new regulator. The role includes confronting poor practices in construction products and establishing new norms aimed at restoring public confidence. OPSS works in liaison with the local authorities and other industry stakeholders to enforce construction product regulations and maintain safety standards. Now, Department for Business and Trade, that is a government department. It's established in February 2023. It was the merger of Department of International Trade and parts of what was BEIS. DBT focuses on economic growth, supporting businesses, negotiating agreements, and fostering a pro-enterprise regulatory system. From our perspective, though, this department is responsible for delivering on trade policy frameworks and is also responsible for such things as it holds the master license for Trustmark, which has an effect on energy regulation. It also is the business that deals with exporting and attracting overseas investment. It has about 19 agencies and public bodies connected to it, so it's quite big, as well as sitting on something called the Construction Leadership Council, which I actually left off the list here. If people don't know what the CLC is, please ask me a question. I'll pick it up at the end. Trading Standard, though, they're the local government services, and they're responsible for protecting consumers, supporting fair and safe trading practices. They enforce a wide range of legislation related to consumer protection, including safety and quality of products, accurate pricing, and preventing counterfeit goods. Trading Standards officers carry out inspections, investigate complaints, and take legal action against businesses or individuals. The regulatory sets out enforcement and market surveillance powers. So what has come in says firms that up, and the Trading Standards then are there to enact it. They also do work with local authority building control. Now, we have building control departments throughout the UK, and they often operate as their own little kingdoms. However, LABC is the trade association of all building control departments, has over 90% of them. Where this is relevant is it means that what they put out through their membership is actually enacted countrywide, because the building control departments obviously enforce, or some may argue in our industry don't, but they are there to enforce the regulation on the ground. There are numerous trade associations that also work in this space, most notably of which is probably the Construction Products Association, which deals with things like the Code for Construction Product Information. Now, quick look at products today. This is very high level, and actually it's data that was I got from Insight Data. But what it does is it alludes to a structure that is not seen in other trade sectors. We have a huge volume of SME fabricators creating a wide variety of products and varying standards and specifications. As here, there are around 25 main UPVC and aluminium extrusion companies that supply the UK market. The stats here: 4,500 window and door fabricators, which some 1,500 are UPVC and 800 aluminium. The critical point here is the fact that out of 12,500 specialist home improvement double glazing companies that fit windows and doors, most of these double glazing companies do not manufacture, so about 11,000. So they buy their products. Now, the front line of the industry is therefore entirely reliant on its supply chain. and only when the customer is more sophisticated, such as commercial, industrial, or house builders, is there an appreciation of the fabricator and manufacturer structure that supports the contractors. If you get at a domestic level and you ever see any complaints that relate to this, it is entirely misunderstood. Now, the problems we're seeing today, obviously product testing in the industry is varied. We have a number of products on the market, and specifically in the domestic sector, quite a few are actually being developed without a proper quality oversight. Tested products and products delivered on site can have huge variances in standards. These products delivered to site sometimes are not acceptable to the customer, nor in many cases to the receiving installer. The standards concerning acceptability, though, may not be acceptable under the Consumer Rights Act and amended regulations. So industry guidance can be overridden legally. And this is something that's actually being looked at. We talk about standards in our sector of what should be acceptable. Doesn't mean it will be the case moving forward. Now, fabricators often place burden of change or renovation of products on the installer, so they send replacement parts as opposed to the whole products. Faulty products are therefore installed, and this is from an installer perspective, at the cost of the installer, which does cause conflict. But when an installer amends the product, any potential warranty is therefore impacted. When the tradesperson then installs the product or retrofits the product, Regulation 7 kicks in, and they are taking responsibility and liability. And from the bodies that I showed on the last slide, the regulator of construction products and OPSS are only responsible for products until they hit site. Then it becomes a trading standards and local authority issue. So there's a crossover territory that we end up playing within the lines of. Now, why do we get such problems? And this is from quite a bit of survey information. There is simply a lot of manual intervention in the production that impacts product quality. Consumer applies contract and commercial pressure due to poor product and speed of replacement to site and defective products. Disagreements on acceptable tolerances, which I just noted on the previous slide. This does not mean the consumer has the right to accept, and there is more protection coming in from trading standards and the Consumer Rights Act. The Act obviously currently talks about reasonable skill and care, but there is that psychological issue that once you've seen an error, it cannot be unseen. When amending a product on site, as well as any additional time and expense on the installer, further issues can arise, and any future issue will always land on that installer. I think it's strange when you look at it from you step back and look at construction, and then you look at trades, and then you look at the home improvement sector. We have a different way of selling and how we mark up, and therefore there is a belief amongst consumers that the glazing installer is entirely responsible. This is significantly different to trades such as heating and how they structure their commercials, where the product manufacturer actually is a key relationship to the consumer. And I think a lot of laws and guidances are written not to take in the different variances in the market. And what we're finding is that in the glazing sector, we're getting some pretty strained relationships between installers and fabricators. And we're too comfortable in our industry to negatively spin the other elements of industry. So quite happy sometimes for installers just to say to the consumer, oh, it's the product they sent me is rubbish, or then the fabricator saying, well, actually, no, the installer doesn't know what it's doing, etc., etc. This affects our overall perception, and it's probably something we need to work on. But then the law, such as Regulation 7, which often is called Approved Document 7, will now look into, because this is a major cause of concern. Now, the UK Building Regulations Approved Document 7 is titled Materials and Workmanship. It sets out standards for the quality of materials and workmanship used in construction. The document ensures that the construction work adheres to certain standards of quality and safety, particularly in regards to materials used and the methods of construction. From a summary perspective, it's in materials and CE marking. The document, if you ever read it, emphasizes the use of proper materials that are suitable for intended purpose. It includes guidelines currently on CE marking, which is the certification mark indicating conformity with health, safety, and environmental protection standards for products sold. The CE marking should be present on the product, its label, packaging, or accompanying documents. There's also the declaration of performance. So in addition, CE marking products should have a declaration of performance providing detailed information. This declaration can be a paper or electronic document or available on a website. And this is the stuff that the Construction Products Association is trying to collect up under the Code Construction Product Information. You then have the British and international standards. For construction products, these are versions of harmonized European standards currently used for CE marking. You have the independent certification schemes, so independent product certification schemes in the UK and elsewhere are acknowledged as sources for information on product performance. These certifications are not supposed to conflict with CE marking, often indicate that if a product is suitable for its intended purposes. Then you get into the workmanship standards, and the 87 looks at ways to establish the adequacy of workmanship, including compliance with the marking, adherence to British standards, certification schemes, and quality management systems. It also covers testing and past experience as a means to demonstrate appropriateness of workmanship. And then there's special considerations. So the document addresses issues like the use of short-lived materials and materials susceptible to changes in their properties. Now, Approved Document 7 is an essential part of ensuring that construction work in the UK is carried out to a standard that guarantees safety, durability, and quality. You will see it referenced on Competent Person Scheme certificates, and it is what the installer is self-certifying that they have met. And as you can imagine, the moment that that occurs, you are taking responsibility for the products you use under law. Now, on a wider thing, as in the status of concerns in the industry, we've seen they're likely to see a number of initiatives aimed at improving products across the UK. We know that there is likely to be amends to the construction product regulations by DLUC. However, there's yet to be any information on this, although some answers on what the direction of travel will be is found in the Building Safety Act Schedule 11. I'm sure everyone has read that. It is not a small read. Now, the previous regulatory framework for construction products was originally devised from EU Construction Products Regulation in 2011. Now, this was retained in UK law and covers some of the products placed in the UK market. However, the framework only applies to products where a designated standard has been adopted or a UK technical assessment applies. So that's about some 400 product families. The Building Safety Act then provides powers so that all construction products marketed in the UK fall under a regulatory regime, allowing them to be withdrawn from the market if they present a risk. Now, the Act creates powers to make provision for regulation of all construction products placed on the UK market. It takes powers to make regulations requiring manufacturers to ensure the products they supply are safe. And do remember with the Act is the thing that created both the Building Safety Regulator and the Regulator for Construction Products. The Act creates the concept of a safety critical product and gives Secretary of State the power to make regulations to place safety critical products on a statutory list, and that will be happening. The Act takes powers for the regulation of such products against safety critical standards. And now a safety critical product is a product that any failure of the product would risk causing death or serious injury to any person. The product is not one for which there are designated standards, or standards is the other variance on this. Now, we have to always be wary that when we talk about safety, the health often comes in quite regularly in the conversation. So it's not a big step to go from, well, if you've got the Building Safety Regulator looking at safety, you have the Department of Department of DESNZ, as in Energy Security and Net Zero, looking at energy standards. It's not far to actually think, well, health will be added in soon. So all these things will start working together. At least that's the theory. So where is the line between safety and health? It's getting more blurred when products are impacting health of occupants, when you're seeing issues and campaigns. AWAB's law, which is currently, I think, being consulted on, that looks at it in social housing. And this is something we in glazing need to be wary of as regards those stakeholders who believe there needs to be a lot more pressure on this. The Building Safety Act also creates powers to create civil penalties and criminal offences for breach of the regulations, and this existing regime is mainly enforced by trading standards. The Act creates power for an enforcement regime to support the regulatory regime, as well as create additional enforcement powers for the existing regulatory regime for the Secretary of State, which paved the way for OPSS to set up the products regulator and for OPSS to then discharge these powers. They will have domain over all products. These powers allow trading standards' existing enforcement regime to be extended to cover new regulatory requirements. So the Act is what we call an enabling act. It basically allows the passing in of other rules and legislation. It allows for charging and recovery of costs. It also creates powers to make regulations allowing the sharing of information about construction products between regulators. So where fault is found, you'll suddenly find that each section of this may well know what is going on and will then form a view probably given to them by the body that actually found it. Now, the example of this is obviously the Construction Products Regulator and the Building Safety Regulator and Local Authority Building Control, who have MOUs and the ability to swap information. So when they look at a problem, they'll look at it collectively. The Act therefore provides an ambitious toolkit of measures which will allow those directly responsible for defective work to be held to account. Now, one of these measures introduces a new cause of action which allows for manufacturers and sellers of construction products to be held accountable where the use of a construction product in construction work causes or contributes to a dwelling being unfit for habitation on completion of these works. It does apply to all products, and where the defective or product is in breach of regulations or has been missold, the limitation liability period for this is 15 years. And if you're looking for that under law, look for the Defective Premises Act. It should be noted, though, that there's been a lot of talk and rumour concerning an independent review of the approved documents to the building regulations. To date, it is just a rumour, but I wouldn't be surprised if you'll find that there's actually a rewrite of the approved documents talked about in the first half of this year, and some independent review being set up to look at it. Now that would take in obviously approved document 7 or regulation 7 we talk about, but it would also take in approved document L and F. Now, if I'm assuming some will have heard about the Morell and Day report. It was commissioned by DLUC, which is Michael Gove's department, and it came out of evidence at the Grenfell public inquiry. It is a review of the construction products testing regime by Paul Morell and Annalise Day, and it was published in 2023. Now, it came out of evidence given by material manufacturers at the public inquiry, and it recommends a series of sweeping reforms aiming to ensure products used on buildings are safe. It sets out recommendations for industry and government alike to improve and strengthen testing regime for construction products. And the uptake of its recommendations will be hugely consequential for safety and improved performance. Now, it estimated that 20,000 to 30,000 products are currently unregulated due to gaps in the current system, and it obviously recommends that these are all brought into scope. It exposed shortfalls in the current system, blaming both the system itself and the conduct of individuals. It states that only construction products under a designated standards are covered by regulation. The regulations were created to ensure fairness in the single market, but there is no specific UK system for testing the safety of construction products. The framework by which standards developed is slow, its output is insufficient, variable quality, and the standards are therefore outdated. It's too complex, it's difficult to understand, it's overcapacity. So a lot of things were highlighted, basically saying that the whole regime is unfit for purpose. And it then made the final point that we all know, that is enforcement is virtually non-existent. Now on the screen, we've put the recommendations that they've come out with. But the aim is to actually bring all products under the scope of the regulator by virtue of a general safety requirement. Manufacturers will be required to share all technical information with the regulator and enforcement authorities, including marketing information and other communications relating to products. Now, How much of this gets enacted and the proportionality of this that affects our industry will be dependent on actually how they go about this. So we're going to have to keep close eye on that. It should be noted, though, that the Department for Levelling Up Housing Communities is yet to respond. So the report was published in April and went out on the industry, and there was a big fanfare. But here we are, 9 months on, and no government response. So we do not know what government is thinking of doing with this, because the changes asked for are quite sweeping. Now, the OPSS obviously is responsible for regulation of construction products. They control the NRCP. The liability under these regulations is governed by Section 148 of the Building Safety Act and applies where the following 4 conditions are met, which I'll read, but they're on screen. Condition A, a person fails to comply with a construction product requirement or makes a misleading statement in relation to the marketing, supply of a product, or manufactures a product which is inherently defective. If you can think of Grenfell at that point. The construction product is installed, applied, attached to a building during construction or otherwise in relation to that building. C, after completion of works, the building or dwelling within a building is unfit for habitation. And D, the construction product was the cause of building or dwelling being unfit for habitation. Now, the person who satisfies condition A on the screen is liable to pay damages to any person with a relevant interest in the building, dwelling for any personal injury, damage to property, or economic loss suffered as a result. And as noted earlier, limitation period for such claims in England and Wales is 15 years from the date the works were completed. The new regulation is aimed to make it easier for organisations undertaking construction work to ensure that when the construction is taking place, only safe products are used, providing appropriate due diligence procedures are in place. However, it is important to note that manufacturers will only be required to assess the risks of their products according to their intended and reasonably foreseeable uses. You do not have to consider every feasible use of your product. The new regulations also only require manufacturers to reduce those risks as far as is possible and provide information about remaining risks. There is no requirement to remove all risks, meaning remaining risks must still be managed. And in the duties under the regulation for products manufactured outside of the country, this will fall under the importer, but not the manufacturer. And so it is important to consider for those who actually have a trade that brings stuff in from abroad, that it is you that's on the hook, not the person who originally manufactured it. And this all comes down to boundaries of law, capabilities for enforcement. It is expected that the new regulator will obviously work closely with other regulators. And that point keeps being made because I suppose it's something structurally different that we've seen in the UK, where you're dealing with one department which is totally not aligned to anything else. Now, that is the aim. And if you attend any government meeting, and I unfortunately attend far too many, you will find in the room probably 5 or 6 government departments these days, whereas historically it would have been 1. Now, the Competence Steering Group was set up as an industry response group to Dame Judith Hackett's review and findings into independent review of building regulations and fire safety. There were 12 working groups under the CSG, and Working Group 12 is the Construction Products Competence, was tasked to create a solution that ensures all those using construction products are competent to do so and can demonstrate their competence to others. Now, this was a group that I don't actually think from memory anyone in the glazing industry was actually represented at. It's run since a year after Grenfell, so there's been quite a lot of time. And what it was aimed at doing was create proposals for an industry agreed standard that covers the core level criteria that should be achieved, demonstrated, maintained by all individuals making choices concerning construction products at all levels in the built environment sector. So it is quite wide ranging. Now, the problem it aims to solve was that performance of products is complex. They have individual characteristics when they're combined to create, say, assemblies or systems. The performance of these systems is not always the sum of its parts. And so it's saying that with this complexity comes poor choices. There's inappropriate use of construction products, can and does result in systems that do not perform to the required outcomes. Critically, we've seen that inappropriate use of construction products within system can and does have dangerous and potentially fatal consequences, both immediate, so death from a single event, or over time, so you're talking like health ventilation issues. It is essential that those involved with construction products are competent to carry out their tasks, i.e. functions, and understand the products and limitations, and have correct level of competence necessary to meet their specific responsibilities and accountability. So we have currently laws around how you manufacture, we have laws around design, so it's selection of products, but this is going far more into the organization, and there's a white paper that basically stresses radical change is needed within the construction product competence, and in particular individuals working across the sectors of manufacturing, merchants, distributors, design, contracting operations and maintenance, and other parts of the supply chain, basically who supply, use or work with products, should be properly assessed and deemed competent to do so. This is obviously something our industry needs to properly look at how this will impact us. Now, this Competence Steering Group was actually finished in December last year, 2023, and has reformed as the Industry Competence Steering Group, and it reports directly into the regulator via the Industry Competence Committee. Obviously, a lot of good news here. Now, from a manufacturer point of view, so fabricators and manufacturers, they need to be aware of these things. I'd say are high on our list for the next year. Now, the construction products review is expected in 2024. There will be information out from DLUNC that will then go to the regulator about what it can do, its powers and relevant elements. Now, this could create significant changes to the way we work, in particular the information we need to provide, and maybe even testing standards. Government's response to the Morell and Day report around product testing and how safety then relates to energy efficiency and health. Obviously, the continued competence work that's being done under the ICSG. And there is also, if anyone actually ever wants to join the Industry Competence Steering Group around products, that is something we can affect. Also, there is any information disseminated from the new regulator. There's not been much has come out yet, and we'd be particularly interested in the pathways on what are you going to be looking at and when. Also, we need to I've put CCPI here. It's the Code for Construction Product Information. Haven't really covered it today, but it concerns information we need to supply about our products. It's predominantly driven around safety, but does cover a wide range of matters from responsibility for product information to accuracy and clarity. It's general information as well as competency, but there is discussions about expanding it because information is needed around energy and then other performance characteristics. And lastly, the competent person scheme conditions of authorization review. Now, this was CP schemes, obviously CERTAS, FENSA, Assure in our market. Now, there's a conditions of authorization is basically the rules that govern them. The building safety regulator wrote about its strategy in December and published it. It's on its website, and in the middle of that, it actually says that the conditions of authorization will be reviewed. And this will consider all aspects from products, their usage, information required, as well as financial protection and liability. Obviously, as an installer, it has much wider implications, and I think it might be a seminar that we need to do, because once the conditions review is announced, I think we as an industry need to be aware of what it means to us. The position of installers, much of what I've covered here is really for manufacturers and fabricators. However, many of the installers do fabricate, and those that don't are reliant on the products created. I think it's fair to say with the reviews and initiatives being undertaken in 2024, there is an opportunity for installers to redefine their relationship with the supply chain. There have been demands from many that we see for a straight line between installer and manufacturer. So if the installer is competent and installs well, some liability needs to potentially pass to the manufacturer. There is obviously counter arguments to that point, but it is something we're going to need to discuss because it is being looked at. And when you think if something goes wrong in the consumer's home, in the recent years, there's been a proliferation of writing to your MP and saying how unfairly I've been treated. as a sector, we need to consider also what other industries are doing and the way they structure, as this may help us moving forward. It's quite simple though. No company actually likes to be on the line for liability, but if we can make it fair, then I think our relationship across the industry will improve. We also have to look at how our industry can support each other publicly. So working together, and I think that is it for a quick view of what's going on. Obviously, I'm open to any questions, and I'll stop sharing the screen, and we'll send out these slides in a couple of days' time.
Hey, yeah, thank you for that. I'm just having a read of some notes. So I think there are a few helpful slides at the end there. I think because this is a products webinar, that it's people who are selling products and quite tied into that. So it's good to have some insight on what their customer, the installer, is thinking and feeling and doing, because they're not really the most communicative, like before something happens. So I think that's helpful. But also giving a checklist of things to keep an eye on in 2024. I think that's sort of why we're doing these things, is to help people know what's coming up. And obviously there's a lot of question marks in there. We're not 100% sure what's going to happen, but at least here's where it is today and the things to look out for. I think that's some information that's helpful that you didn't have.
I was going to say, when you talk about products and glazing, we always talk about ADL and U values. We may talk about glass standards, but I'm trying to think that there's not, these things that sit behind it actually are driving massive changes that will affect all that. If they review the documents and rewrite them all, then ADL, Regulation 7, all these things change, and how they work together. Because there's been a lot of commentary when Future Home Standard originally, the first bit came out, that they don't work together. ADL and ADF, one says ventilation, one says energy efficiency and performance, and the aim is to actually tidy all that up, because as you can imagine, it's not just those. There are other areas where if you put them all down on paper and just read them verbatim, you think, I don't get it. And that creates problems that government then have to face when they're actually trying to enforce. They're trying to make a regime that they can oversee, but also enforce against from a positive nature, as in the HSE have always said that it sees the role of enforcement as a positive activity.
Yeah, I think a lot of installers would agree with you there, the ones who are registered to work anywho. I've got a few questions actually. So there's a couple that are rolling through, and there's a couple that have been pre-submitted as well from people who are attending today. So I'll make sure I get those questions asked. But before we go into that, obviously you mentioned there are several links between products and health. So on those two subjects combined together, you also touched on AWAB's law. Can you just kind of give a little bit more detail into what effect that consultation will have?
Yeah, well, AWAB's law is look at social housing. It's basically based around obviously what happened there, where there were clear ventilation issues. If you look at the building, it was insulated badly. Then glazing was put in and tightened it even more, and then the ventilation got out of control. And there was this belief that people in blocks of flats who have nowhere to dry their clothes should certainly not be doing it on radiators, etc., etc. And this led to the death of a child. Now, we in the UK have, I think, our number 2 health issue at the NHS is lung related.
Respiratory, yeah.
And the social housing group was actually, this review is being done via Michael Gove's request. So he got very clear on that actually social housing providers, if you don't look after your residents, we're going to start taking money off you, or we're going to put you on whatever list, so we're going to enforce against you. So this is a review of what do you do in the circumstances. So it's going to have a huge focus on health. And there, as I think I said earlier, we've got an all-parliamentary group looking at healthy homes next week, where we'll be looking at, well, what can we actually expect? Because what starts in social housing, and if you see a lot of the things like fundings and that, like eco, etc., they often start in social housing because they can control that environment, because they can make demands and they can say, well, these things need to change, these properties, so we'll just change them. When you get into the able to pay space, i.e. those that can choose what to do, that's when it gets difficult. But that doesn't mean that the law that starts here doesn't drift into there, because you got 27 million homes and only about 6 million under social housing and local authority control. So it's not the big piece. So we need to see what they say about standards and then their expectations. I think one of the things we will probably see as an industry is the requirement for ventilation assessments, and simply saying, "Oh, I did an air tightness." Well, air tightness is not ventilation. It's two very different things driven at different elements. The funding laws, the funding streams that you're seeing, local authority delivery scheme, the social housing decarbonisation scheme, and Eco4 all use ventilation assessment. So that would mean a massive retrain of an area of our industry. So we have to really pay attention to what the expectation is. They will talk about proportionality, so what is fair. But when it comes down to coroner's reports and deaths, particularly of vulnerable groups, children, etc., it's that there will be a lot of power behind it.
Yeah, certainly hope so. That was really tragic circumstances, and I'm sure it's not isolated either. It's just made it to the news, hasn't it? So this is an interesting one. How long do you think before we have new build regulations become mandatory for replacement products? Because there's quite a difference, isn't there?
I'm presuming that's a future home standard question.
I would say so.
Yeah,
I think
obviously, yes, the future home standard made some changes. Now, at the moment, there is a pathway that leads to 2025, but that only covers new build. That the replacement market isn't on the list at the moment. Now, from my last and I have to say, in my opinion, but this is from talking to civil servants, it will be brought across, but it could be anywhere between 25 and 2030. And because it's not being seen on the list at the moment, I think you're looking towards more of the other side of that. Now, it might seem ridiculous to some, but there are so many critical aspects they need to deal with as regards buildings.
Yeah.
And there will be a priority list, and every government department that gets involved has their own priorities based off what they're judged on. So I think it's a case of we will know more later this year. Obviously, the Future Home Standard consultation is ongoing, and after that, government will have a response to that, and I think that will dictate what next.
Okay. Yeah, I suppose you've got a change in government in there. Do you think that will going a little off piste here?
Well, no, it's a fair point, but the regulators are outside of government. So
okay.
It's like if Labour come in and Conservatives no longer there, the building safety regulator, national regulator, construction products will still be there doing their job.
Yeah, okay, that's good. That's good. And I think this will be sort of a bit more of a follow-on because we're sort of talking a little about U values. So will there be any consideration for very small windows, such as a toilet window that never really get a good U value? Or is there a chance for an average U value to be offered? So the total U value of all windows combined in a property, large and small, lumped together?
Yeah, that comes down to the measurements that are required. Again, that is being looked at under the consultation. Obviously, the consultation put out that they wanted a measurement for every window. And yes, it depends on the size of it, and much as in new builds, obviously with new build properties, they'll change the design of the building to meet whatever is required. When it gets into replacement area, it becomes an issue. So I think it's fair to say, and as a member who actually sat on the Future Home Standard Working Group and spoke to the people writing the policy, a lot of it is aspirational it's to see what comes back. I think the consultation responses are entirely important on this one. It's not a lock. You know, sometimes you see consultation, you think, well, they're going to do it, whatever. This one they're actually asking. There was a lot of I suppose it was debate around, and I remember the Glazing Summit where people talk about 0.8 and it was never going to be there. It's always going to be around 1.2. But that's because we as an industry look at what we do, and and as government, when they actually make these decisions, they look at something called the Green Book, which gives them calculations around value of change. And if you ever did that, you would think, well, 0.8 will never meet that. Now, when they look at consultations and when they look at what they can get at, they want to know what improvements they can get the easiest way. And so they will be comparing the different responses from the industries and saying, look, this is the way we should drive. There's a lot of debate at the moment. So I think someone came out the other day, some lord or lady, and said that fabric first is not required, which is a big difference because obviously we're a fabric element. So it's yeah, I think there's a lot to clear out, but I think it comes down to the simple fact of we need to get consultation responses on what is actually can be done accurately on the ground.
Yeah, fair enough. Question submitted. What are the actions that installers can take in order to ensure that their liability is limited in the future? Is it records of due diligence on the choice of products, or more detailed records of what products have been fitted and where, etc.? Is it something else? What have you got for us?
Yeah, no, well, that's actually a really good one, because it does come down to data. There's been now, and I mentioned there's conditions of authorization review. One of the issues that's come is people do what they have to do just to meet the requirements in front of them, and they're not doing enough to protect themselves for when things go wrong. So when you're talking about competency, there are, and there is a requirement for you to understand the competency of those that you appoint and employ. So if I get something off you, I should know that you're competent. Well, I can't test everyone, and I'm not going to have very many friends if I go around the market saying, well, I don't know if you're competent, I don't know what you've done. So keeping a record of why something is selected is a very important point for an installer. So I chose this product because of this, and that's where things like the Code for Construction Product Information comes in, because that would be a central point you go to and say, well, I've taken this product because on there it says, this is the standard it meets. This is how, and I've used it in collaboration with these other products, which also they're supposed to sit together. So, and then I'm actually using the system. So this is probably something that the certification bodies need to come out and say, look, that's what you should be recording, not necessarily what you're telling us. So we as Certas currently only need to know your number of windows, the fact that they actually met the rules, the number of doors, when you installed it and all that. We will be asking for other additional information because we'll be told we have to, but what you collect should be beyond that, because you're thinking about protecting your business. So maybe we can put some stuff out there on what would be seen as in the eyes of the regulator on enforcement. So because that's what it comes down to. When someone, say from trading standards or the building safety regulator comes in and say, well, I don't like this, how will they judge you? And if we can effectively say, well, that's what they're going to be looking for, if you do that, you protect yourself. I think it's probably a fair thing for us to put out in the future.
Yeah, I think it's that whole keep records, isn't it, or create a paper trail for everything so you can pull it back. And I don't know if this ties into it, but you mentioned a new number here. I've written it down that you said 15 years liability. Well, I thought it was 6 years liability under the Consumer was it Consumer Services Act or something like that?
No, it's Consumer Rights Act.
That's it,
It was used as the basis when they talked about financial protection for competent person schemes. That's why it's 6 years, although our industry actually went 10 generally. So people talk about insurance-backed guarantees that are 10 years. It is 6 is the law requirement. The Defective Premises Act basically has extended prospective liability, which means liability in the future for 15 years from the date. Now, how that gets applied, because a lot of this is based around response to Grenfell. So actually, if you do cladding, it's 30 years, retrospective. So it brings all these buildings back into scope. It's the aim of that. But moving forward, there will need to be some real clarity on what is expected, because you know, and I think it will relate to the risk of the products as well. So critical safety products, which are those that can cause death, and we have to define which of those in our industry will actually be looked at in a different light. I think it's fair to say at this moment, and it will come into conditions of authorization review, there is not an expectation that you'll suddenly say, as an installer, you need to give a 15-year guarantee, but that will all have to be tested and guidance will have to be given. And,
right.
and this is where the bodies that actually have an influence on this should really be working together, because there's no point one saying 15, one saying 6, one saying 10. They actually need to pick something that our industry can base around and use as a standard. And
sorry, that it would involve people in our industry getting a bit more involved, and I think that that's the struggle. So I suppose we need to figure out how to reach those people.
And this was, you know, there was a meeting this week, and I can't remember what it was, but there was a lot of serious government civil servants in it, and the issues we're having is a lot of stuff that we're doing doesn't work for the SME, and the reason was, when you have big lobby groups like the Construction Leadership Council, it is full of tier 1 contractors. The leader that, you know, runs MEX, you know, these are big companies making decisions around contracting, which is, you know, installing, where they've got teams that do these things. So how something translates into the SME installer, but you're not getting the SME installer's voice in the room, because they can't afford to spend 4 hours talking on a subject and not being on site. And so more needs to be done around that, and simply saying, oh, we've got an SME representative on our board or in our collective, it's one voice out of 20, it does nothing. There's going to be a lot that needs to be considered around this, and that is a real worry for our industry. Decisions are made that affect our industry that we don't have a play in.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I mean, you touched on the CLC there, and you said someone should ask a question about the CLC. You left them off the key players list. So tell us how they're a key player in all of this.
Well, the Construction Leadership Council is it's a collective body of senior construction businesses. It is directly linked to the Department of Business and Trade, so they sit on their board and they support it heavily. They're very much involved in construction elements. Now, part of CLC goes down to what they call RMI, repair, maintenance and installation, so it's our domestic installers as well. So they do actually cover all areas and give advice. They also are a huge, they're connected into the National Retrofit Hub, which is about energy performance change in buildings. They have a lot of influence, and so we need to be wary of what they're saying, and as well as trying to influence them on, you know, it's all very well you talking about this, but try and be clear that that's for a large construction site. One of the things, say, they champion is the demand for CSCS cards.
Right.
And you think, well, if that suddenly came out, then our industry, which doesn't really adopt them, would have to do something different. But, you know, so it's, if you map it down, it's a massive piece of paper, and all these people, what you have to be considered of is who actually has influence over the things we care about. So you start there. This is what affects our industry the most. Who actually can affect that regulation, that law, that enforcement, and go from there.
I suppose that's a good example of how not out of touch, but, you know, how what the CLC are doing and the way that these policies are built using the CSCS card. There's not much of that going on. I don't think it's necessary, is it, in domestic replacement?
No, it is on construction sites, but they want it everywhere. And there's a CSCS Alliance that's also driving for that. I think such things in domestic is quite a way away currently. As in, I met the CEO of CSCS the other day just to talk about it. They're focused on other things.
Yeah.
But all these things down the road, it only takes someone to then go, you know what, let's add that. Let's add that to the conditions of authorization for schemes, or let's add that, you know, for requirement on well, it is in house building a fair amount, but actually specify it for all work here under state local authority. It soon gets in, and and it is, you know, I don't think as an industry we're particularly good at the outbound engagement.
No, not necessarily. I think we've got time for a couple more questions. I've got one more here submitted. Right, so it's been mentioned the products and failure from an installer point of view and fabricator having to change as the installer will take responsibility from that point. Does it go up the chain? As from a fabricator, we fit a lot of finished components to our products. Will they have to start having site visits?
That's a good one. Yeah, it's this whole relationship thing is obviously in fairness, from a Certas perspective, because we're 3,500 installers are members of ours. We hear a lot about the one side of that. There is always a second side. So what we are trying to do, well, I say we, sorry, the building safety regulator, they've put the conditions of authorization up for review. That will cover everything. So because those who self-certify work, and we think we've got about 10,000 businesses in our industry, out of 5,500 actually use competent person schemes. Competent person schemes are allowed to certify work in high-risk buildings. And so they do work in house buildings. So they work through all the chains. So we're trying to look at it from that way and say, if you've got at a serious HRB level, very specific ways of working, you've got things called gateways, and I won't go through all that now, but it's a hugely regulated process-based space. Then you get what will work in, say, a domestic level and the expectations and relationships between manufacturers and installers, because in the end, government always wants to know who's liable and accountable. And then you work out the path in between, you know, taking out the house building sites, taking out the social housing elements, taking out the local authority structures. So this is something that is very much up for debate, because yes, there are much as we say that, you know, installers are having to rectify a lot of poor products that come to site, there's also a lot of manufacturer or fabricators that take responsibility for a mess an installer makes because it's their brand. And so it does go both ways, and it's one of those ones that unfortunately there is so much traffic on, as in we've had complaint after complaint thrown back saying, you know, it's another glazing one where both sides are paying each other, and this poor consumer has just written to an MP, said, you know, what is this, and how do I get out of this? Or they've gone to trading standards, or they've gone to citizens advice, and you wouldn't believe how it's adding up. And we are very high on the list, unfortunately, as an industry. Roofing's quite up there too, and so it's something that we need to probably work out what is fair and what is reasonable, and say that's how we see all the parties. The National Home Improvement Council recently did a communication that got signed off by the regulator, which is to do with what is best practice, what is law and what is best practice for an installer, i.e. a tradesperson, and what is law and what is best practice for a consumer. So consumer has some requirements on them too, and that can then be expanded and said, well, let's put some of the supply chain into that. But that was to help tidy up what goes on at the door. It's this whole relationship, as you can imagine, is got a lot of people involved. The CPA are probably a big proponent in that area, and so it might be a case of we need to get a few people around the table and say, look, this is our view on this whole direction of travel. So it's not a great answer really, because it's really, we don't know at the moment.
No, but it's something, you know, it's a benchmark. So if we do something like this again in a few months' time or a year's time, and we can figure out, you know, what questions we had today and what's answered, and because there will of course be more questions that need to be answered probably in a few months' time. So it's certainly a watch this space, I think, isn't it? All of that.
Well, it's also I think what we get very focused on a few of the consultations and miss some really big things because we don't think it applies to us. You know, like the national regulation construction, but is that really our problem? Well, it will be. Maybe not 24, but 25, 26, 27, and by then it's too late, because what they've agreed and what they've put in and how they're doing something has been tested in one industry and then or one trade and applied to another.
Yeah, I think having this sort of a platform, though, talking about it this early on, I think a lot of people attending today and watching in the industry would argue that they just didn't know, because, you know, it's so stretched out over so many years. So I think that might be a note in there. If anyone is interested in, you know, getting a bit more involved, can you send me an email letting me know, and we can talk and keep you updated, talk about doing these roundtable discussions and other such things, because it would be, yeah, really helpful to have different unique.
Yeah. We've had some recent things where I-80 do apprenticeships. We've had it with CSCS. We've had it with training. We've had it with the regulator. Have all said if we want to put an industry thing together, they will come and tell us stuff. So it might be something we need to talk to, say, the Glazing Summit or something like that.
Yeah. Wow. I think that we are a minute over time now. I'm sure people are, you know, itching to get on with their busy lives. So thanks to all attendees who were here today and for your questions and input also prior to the event going live. Thank you, John, of course, for coming along to share what's happening, things to look out for, and of course that perspective as well from installers. I think that that's really helpful for, you know, obviously people selling products and other such things. Like I said, if anyone is interested in getting involved in talking more and helping out with consultations and other things, or just wanting to know what to keep an eye on, then please get in touch with me, and we will of course make sure yeah, we keep you involved. Thanks again to John and our attendees, and yeah, keep an eye on our social media channels for you know, this, and we'll be sending out a post-webinar email pack as well, which will have John's slides in it. And of course, any questions, that's what we're here for. So thank you all, take care, and hope to see you at another one in the future. Cheers, bye-bye.